Hey, welcome back to Quiet Badge's Stories. I'm glad you're here. Before we get into tonight's story, if this is your first time stopping by, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We put out new stories every week, and trust me, you don't want to miss them. And if you're already part of this community, thank you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love seeing all the different places you all come from. Now settle in, because this one is going to stay with you. Her name was Lena Pruitt, and nobody at Caldwell Regional Medical Center thought much about her. That wasn't unusual. Nurses in the overnight wing of a mid-sized hospital in eastern Tennessee don't get thought about much by anyone. They move through fluorescent hallways at 3 a.m. carrying medications and chart updates in paper cups of water, and the world mostly lets them do it without paying attention. That was fine with Lena, more than fine. She had spent years arranging her life so that nobody paid attention. She had worked the overnight shift for 4 years. She requested it. She preferred the quiet, she said, whenever anyone asked. She preferred fewer patients, she said. She preferred working when the administrators were home asleep. Those things were all true. They were also not the whole truth. The whole truth was that Lena Pruitt had a face that people recognized, and she didn't want it recognized, not here, not anymore. She wore her scrubs a size too large. She kept her dark hair pulled back tight, no makeup, no earrings, nothing that would give a face more shape than it needed. She walked with her shoulders slightly forward, weight low, the particular posture of someone trained to take up as little space as possible when space was a tactical consideration. She had learned that posture in a different life. She kept it in this one because old habits don't come out in the wash. The other nurses liked her well enough. She was reliable. She showed up early and stayed late and never complained about the difficult patients. She had a way of talking people down when they got scared or combative. A low, even voice, flat and steady, that made people feel like whatever was happening was going to be handled. Cynthia Booker, who had been charge nurse on the overnight wing for 11 years, told the new hires that if they were ever unsure about a patient, they should ask Lena. She doesn't panic, Cynthia told them. I don't know what it is about her, but she just doesn't panic. None of them knew why. Lena didn't tell them. What she had been, before the scrubs and the overnight shifts in the fluorescent hallways, was a combat rescue officer. United States Air Force. She had deployed 3 times, once to Afghanistan, twice to locations she still didn't name in casual conversation. She had gone into places where other people couldn't go and brought back people who otherwise wouldn't have come back. Her call sign, the one the team used, was Greystone. Because she was steady, they said. Because she didn't move unless she had to, and when she moved, nothing stopped her. She got out when she was 31. The circumstances of her leaving were complicated, and she didn't discuss them with anyone in Caldwell. She got her nursing license, moved to eastern Tennessee because she'd driven through it once, and thought it looked like a place where a person could disappear into a routine, and she built a life that was very small and very controlled and mostly fine. She was 36 now. She had a 2-bedroom apartment 12 minutes from the hospital. She had a cat named Hal. She had a small vegetable garden in the back that she tended on weekends when she wasn't sleeping off the overnight. She didn't date. She didn't go to parties. She showed up, she did her work, she went home. That was the life. She had chosen it deliberately, and she was mostly at peace with it. The night everything changed was a Thursday in late October. The shift had been quiet. A post-surgical patient in 14B who kept pulling at his IV. 2 elderly women in the memory care annex who needed redirecting every 40 minutes. A teenager in the observation room who had taken something at a party and was now cycling through tearful apologies to his mother. Routine. Lena had done her charts, done her rounds, helped Cynthia restock the supply cabinet at 2 a.m. because the overnight shift runs on rituals. At 3:47, the emergency bay doors opened. Lena heard it from the corridor. The specific sound of those doors, the gust of cold air that followed, and then voices, more voices than a quiet Thursday night usually produced. She finished what she was writing and walked to the nursing station to look. There were 4 of them. 3 men, 1 woman, all of them wearing civilian clothes, all of them with the bearing of people who did not stand in doorways and wait to be helped. The woman had her arm around one of the men. He was upright, but barely. His shirt was dark at the side, and Lena's eyes went there automatically, the way they always did, reading the situation before the rest of her brain had finished processing what she was seeing. Gunshot. Left side. The entry angle was wrong for a straight-on shot. Probably a graze, but the bleeding was significant, and the man was pale in a way that meant he'd been losing it for a while. The ER attending on overnight was a doctor named Whitmore, who was technically competent and reliably slow. He was already moving toward them from the other end of the corridor. Lena watched him assess the situation and begin the intake process. Calm, methodical, doing everything in the right order. She went back to her charts. The 2 men who weren't injured stood near the door. They didn't pace. They didn't look at their phones. They stood the way people stand when they have been trained to stand in uncertain environments, weight balanced, eyes on exit still. Lena noticed that too and put it away. She had noticed also the way the taller one had scanned the corridor when he first came in. Not the nervous scan of a frightened civilian. Something more practiced. She knew what it looked like. She had done it herself in every new space for 15 years. She didn't think about it again for almost an hour. At 4:30, Cynthia came to find her. "The two men by the door," Cynthia said, keeping her voice low. "The tall one is asking to speak with someone on staff. I told him I'd send someone. I'm in the middle of, Lena." Cynthia gave her the look she reserved for situations that required cooperation rather than preference. "He's very polite. He's also been standing there for an hour without moving, and I would like to know what's happening with his friend in Bay 3. Lena put down her clipboard. The tall one was about 40, with the kind of face that had been somewhere difficult and settled back into calm afterward. Dark hair going gray at the temples, a jaw that looked like it had been set once and never revisited. He was wearing a plain gray jacket and dark pants and boots that were clean but not new. His eyes when he looked at her were the color of old pewter. "I'm Lena Pruitt," she said. "I'm one of the overnight nurses. What can I do for you?" "Declan Marsh," he said. He didn't offer his hand. "The man they brought in, Stuart, he's going to be okay?" "I can't share patient information with. He's my brother," Declan said. Lena looked at him. He wasn't lying, she could tell most of the time. Something in the micro-timing of a person's stillness. The attending is with him. The wound isn't what I would call life-threatening, but they're going to need to assess the bleeding and make sure there's no organ involvement. Declan absorbed this. "Okay," he said. "What happened to him?" A pause, not evasion, consideration. "That's a longer conversation," he said. "It usually is," Lena said, and went back to work. She thought about Declan Marsh for the rest of her shift in the way she thought about things she had filed under notice but don't act on. He was calm in a particular way. He was watchful in a particular way. The woman with them had a scar along her jawline that had the look of something that had happened fast and been dealt with in the field. The other man, the shorter one, moved his weight from foot to foot every few minutes, a rhythm, like someone running a continuous low-level calculation. These were not civilians who had walked in off the street after a random incident. Lena didn't know what they were, but she knew what they weren't. At 6:15, 20 minutes before the end of her shift, she was at the nursing station finishing her last chart when she heard someone behind her. She didn't turn immediately. She finished the sentence she was writing. Then she said, "Mr. Marsh." "Sorry," he said. He didn't sound particularly sorry. "I didn't want to startle you." "You didn't." She turned. He was standing about 8 feet away, which was a respectful distance, she noted. Not the distance of someone who wanted something. The distance of someone who had been trained to approach carefully. "Is there something you need?" He looked at her for a moment with those pewter-colored eyes. Then he said, "My brother asked me to find out your name. I told you my name. He asked me to look for someone by a different name." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Slowly she noticed the way someone moves when they know that a fast hand in a jacket pocket sends a particular message, and took out a folded piece of paper. He held it out. She didn't take it yet. "What is that?" "A name," Declan said. "He said if I found someone who moved the way you move, I should show them this." She took the paper, unfolded it. On it in a handwriting she didn't know was written, "Greystone. Your father said you'd know the coordinates." The corridor was very quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped in its slow, reliable rhythm. Lena read the paper again. Then she folded it and held it and looked at Declan Marsh and said, in a voice that she kept exactly even, "Who is your brother?" "His name is Stuart Marsh," Declan said. "He served with a man named Pruitt. Garrett Pruitt, Chief Master Sergeant, retired." Her father. She hadn't spoken to him in 3 years. Not because of anger, or not only because of anger. Because the last time she'd seen him, she'd been in a hospital bed herself, and he had looked at her with an expression she didn't know how to carry, and she had asked him to leave, and he had, and somehow 3 years had gone by since then, like a road you drive without watching the mile markers. "Where is he?" she said. "That's what Stuart needs to tell you," Declan said, "when he's able." She did not go home after her shift. She went to the family waiting area near the ear, a room with chairs the color of old mustard and a vending machine that hummed, and she sat there. Declan sat across from her. The woman, whose name, it emerged, was Petra, brought coffee from somewhere, real coffee, not the machine kind. The shorter man, whose name was Ruiz, stood near the door in his habitual way. Stuart Marsh was out of surgery. It turned out the wound had required more attention than the initial assessment suggested, and asleep, and the attending had said he would be coherent by mid-morning. "Tell me what you can," Lena said. Declan looked at Petra. Something passed between them, the kind of fast and wordless consultation that forms between people who have worked together in close quarters for a long time. "Your father contacted Stuart about 6 weeks ago," Declan said. "They hadn't talked in years. Stuart said the message came through a channel that your father would have only used if he couldn't use anything else." "What kind of message?" "That he needed someone to find something, and he couldn't find it himself." "Documents." Declan paused. Someone had been watching him, he said. He couldn't move freely. He needed people who could move where he couldn't. And Stuart agreed. Stuart and your father served together in places that put certain debts on the ledger, Declan said. The kind that don't have an expiration date. Lena understood that. She understood it down to the bone. Where is my father now? Stuart will tell you what he knows when he wakes up, Declan said. But Lena. He waited until she was looking directly at him. Your father sent Stuart to find you, not to find us, he said. He paused, choosing words. He said the only person he trusted to do what needed to be done was Greystone. She sat with that for a while. The vending machine hummed. Down the corridor, the hospital was warming up into its morning rhythms, voices lifting, a cart somewhere, the shift change beginning. He should have called me, she said. He said you wouldn't answer. She didn't respond to that. Stuart Marsh was awake at 9:47. He was pale and hooked to 2 different drips and looked like a man who had spent the night losing blood, which was exactly what he was. But his eyes, when Lena came in, were clear. Greystone, he said. His voice was rough. You should be resting, she said. I've been resting. He shifted against the pillow. You look like him, you know. Your father. The same thing in the eyes. That thing where you look like you already know what you're going to do, and you're just waiting for everyone else to catch up. She pulled the chair up to the bedside and sat down. Tell me, he told her. Her father, Garrett Pruitt, was 63 years old and had been retired from the Air Force for 8 years. After retirement, he'd done what a lot of career military men did, consulting, security assessment, the kind of quiet work that didn't have a clean job title. He was good at it. He'd been approached, Stuart said, about 18 months ago by a private security firm called Halcyon Group, operating out of a regional office in Knoxville. The work seemed straightforward: site assessment, risk protocols, civilian infrastructure. What her father had found about 4 months in was that Halcyon was not doing what it said it was doing. They were running an insurance and acquisition scheme, Stuart said. Medical facilities, mostly. Small regional hospitals, veterans clinics, a few rehab centers. They'd assess the sites, identify the ones with weak administrative structures, and then, through a series of shell contracts, they'd start positioning themselves to absorb the facilities. Drive up liability, create compliance gaps, push the boards toward sale. That's not illegal, Lena said. The way they were creating the compliance gaps was. Stuart coughed, winced. Falsified inspection records. Backdated certifications. 2 of the facilities they targeted, the ones that pushed back, had incidents afterward. Patient medication errors. An equipment failure. The kind of thing that looks like institutional negligence if you don't know what you're looking for. Lena felt something settle in her chest, quiet and cold and certain. They manufactured incidents. That's what your father believed. He had documentation, 4 months of it. Stuart looked at her. He tried to go through a contact at the VA. The contact went quiet after 48 hours. Then Garrett realized he was being watched. Where is he? Staying with a man named. Stuart stopped, frowned. I wrote it down. Declan has it. I'll get it. She stood. The documentation he collected. Is it safe? He said he sent it somewhere. Stuart met her eyes again. He said Greystone would know what to do with it. She did. She didn't know yet what she was going to do, or exactly how, or what it was going to cost. But that part, what to do with evidence of institutional harm against people who couldn't protect themselves. That part she knew. It took her 11 days. She was not alone in it. Declan and Petra had their own reasons for wanting Halcyon Group to face what it had done. Stuart's injury was not the first contact the group had made with people who got too close. Ruiz had spent 16 years in Army intelligence and still had contacts at the kind of federal offices that received the kind of documentation her father had compiled. She drove to Greenville first, where her father was staying with an old sergeant friend named Walter Estes in a farmhouse at the end of a long gravel road. She hadn't called ahead. She'd asked Declan for the address and driven there on a Tuesday morning with the windows down, and the Blue Ridge in the distance, and a very particular feeling in her stomach. The feeling of being 48 hours out from a drop and knowing there was no calling it off now. Her father was in the kitchen when she arrived. He heard the car on the gravel and came to the door. He stood there for a moment, watching her get out of the truck, and he looked older than she remembered, which was not surprising because it had been 3 years and people do that, they get older. He also looked steady. He'd always been steady. Lena, he said. You could have called, she said. You wouldn't have answered. I might have. He looked at her. Would you have? She thought about the 3 years. She thought about what it had taken to build her life small enough to be manageable, and what it had cost, and whether the cost had been worth it. She thought about a paper with the word Greystone written on it and how it had felt to read it. Like a key turning. I don't know, she said honestly, but you could have tried. He nodded. Just once. The nod of a man who knows he's being offered something he doesn't fully deserve and is going to accept it carefully. Come inside, he said. I'll make coffee. The documentation went to 2 places simultaneously. A contact at the Department of Justice that Ruiz had reached through 3 layers of secure introduction, and a journalist at the Knoxville Sentinel who had been investigating Halcyon Group's real estate patterns for 8 months without knowing what she was actually looking at. The journalist's name was Trish Carver. Lena met with her once, in person, in a diner off I-40. She didn't tell Trish who she was or what she had done before she was a nurse. She gave Trish a folder of organized materials and explained what each item documented and what it proved and why the connections between them mattered. She spoke for 40 minutes without notes. Trish took 6 pages of notes and kept looking up with an expression that was professional excitement carefully contained. "How do you know how to read this stuff?" Trish asked near the end. "I've read a lot of complicated things," Lena said, "in difficult conditions." Trish looked at her for a moment with the expression of a journalist who understands she's in the presence of a story she's not going to get to write. "Fair enough," she said. The first article ran 9 days later. The DOJ inquiry was announced 3 days after that. Halcyon Group's regional director, a man named Jeffrey Alderman, who had sat in a glass-walled office in Knoxville for 6 years, and made decisions about what happened to small hospitals in small towns without ever visiting a single one of them, resigned on a Thursday morning without comment. 3 other executives followed within the week. Lena read about it on her phone during her break, standing in the corridor outside the supply room at 4 in the morning. She read the article twice, then she put her phone in her pocket and finished her shift. Her father came to Caldwell in November. He drove himself, which she hadn't expected. She'd thought he might take some convincing, that he might still be in the habit of staying low, staying out of sight. But he showed up on a Sunday afternoon, in a truck that needed new shocks, and stood at the door of her apartment with the slightly formal bearing of a man who was not sure of his welcome, but had decided to show up anyway. She let him in. She made coffee. They sat at her kitchen table, and Hal the cat climbed into her father's lap without invitation, which was unusual for Hal, who generally maintained a considered distance from strangers. "He likes you," Lena said. "Animals are good judges," her father said. They talked for 3 hours. It was not an easy 3 hours in all places. There were things said that needed to be said, and things that were hard to say, and at least one long silence that neither of them tried to fill. But there was also coffee, and a cat who fell asleep in the Chief Master Sergeant's lap, and the quiet specific to a Sunday afternoon in eastern Tennessee, when the light comes in low, and the trees are past their color, and everything feels like it is settling. At the end of it, before he left, her father stood in the hallway and looked at her, and she recognized the expression. The same one from the hospital room 3 years ago. But different, too, less broken by it. "I should have called," he said. "You should have," she agreed. "And you should have answered," he said. She thought about that. Probably. He put on his jacket. "I'll call," he said. "Next time." "I'll answer," she said, and she meant it. She watched him walk down the path to the truck that needed new shocks. She watched him drive away. Then she went back inside and sat at the kitchen table with Hal and the low November light, and she thought about how strange it was, that it had taken a folded piece of paper with a call sign she hadn't heard in years, and a man bleeding in an ER bay, and 11 days of doing the thing she had always been able to do. To bring her back to a kitchen table with her father and a cup of coffee. She had spent 4 years arranging her life so that nobody paid attention. She thought, now, that maybe she had been hiding from the wrong things. 3 weeks later, Cynthia Booker stopped her in the corridor after rounds. Cynthia had the expression she wore when she had observed something and decided to say it. "You seem different," Cynthia said. "Different how?" Cynthia considered. "Less like you're waiting for something to go wrong." Lena thought about that. She thought about Declan Marsh and the careful distance he'd kept when he approached her. She thought about Stuart Marsh awake in a hospital bed saying, "You look like him, you know." She thought about her father in the kitchen doorway saying, "Come inside, I'll make coffee," and the way the ordinary weight of that sentence had felt like something she hadn't known she'd been missing. "I'm working on it," she said. Cynthia nodded, satisfied, and they went back to work. She was Lena Pruitt. She carried the trays. She worked the overnight. She had a cat named Hal and a vegetable garden, and a life she had kept deliberately small. But she had answered this time. And she was going to keep answering. Some things you don't get to bury just because you decide to. Some things wait, patient as stone, and eventually they send someone through the door. And when they do, when someone walks in carrying a piece of paper with your name on it, your real name, the one you earned in the dark in places you don't talk about, you can ignore it, or you can stand up. Lena Pruitt stood up. She always had. Thank you so much for spending time with this story. If it stayed with you, if it hit somewhere real, please hit that like button. It helps this channel more than you know. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time. New stories go up every week, right here on Quiet Badge's Stories. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from. I read every single one. I'll see you next time.